Hi, my name's Damien Jones, and I'm here to discuss residential services in Australia for people with PWS, Prader-Willi syndrome. I work for Interaction, and it's been a really exciting time for us because we've recently opened 3 new houses or models for people with PWS. And so our residential services are expanding, and we're now getting a lot more people in with PWS. And we also started this journey a long time ago because we actually opened the first house in Australia that was specifically for people with PWS. So I've been working for Interaction for over 15 years, and I actually started in a Prader-Willi specific house, one of our first ones. Now, Interaction have been providing services to those people for even longer. And it's actually been good to see that as those people have gotten older, and now those 3 are in their 50s, that they're still living healthy lives and they're still living long lives. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the right supports. So the right supports is really having a program that is designed specifically with people with PWS in mind, because we know that people with PWS have very specific needs around food and around behaviours. And if we don't put the right supports in, quite often things can go really wrong, and they can put on a lot of weight, and they can put themselves at a lot of risk for health. But with the right supports, they can live very healthy lives, and probably in a lot of ways I find that the people that we look after probably live more healthy lives than what a lot of people do in the general community. The main thing is to have a very strong structure. So when we say structure, that means that everything is always known in advance and there's a lot of certainty about what's going to happen. And people with PWS really thrive with that type of consistency and knowing exactly what's going to happen. But then within that program, we've also learned that you need to be able to make choices, and people with PWS also need to be able to negotiate and learn, because if you're never given an opportunity to make mistakes, then it's very hard for anybody to progress and to become more independent. So supporting with PWS really needs a program that is very structured, but also gives people a chance to make some choices. So no presentation on disability support in Australia would be complete without discussing briefly the NDIS, which is the National Disability Insurance Scheme. So the NDIS is the scheme that provides the funding for everybody with disabilities in Australia, and it's individualised funding. So what happens is that you have to have a meeting and to get that funding, and your funding needs to be deemed as reasonable and necessary. So that means that you've actually got to make a case as to why you need the level of funding that you get. And then once they approve the funding, you'll get like a package, and that package can be spent with a lot of any different providers. And there's really a lot of flexibility within that scheme as to the types of things that you could use that funding for. So residential support is part of that, and then also behavioural support. You could look at getting somebody to help you if you're parents to find things to do during the day. All the day programs, or some of the supported employment options are funded by the scheme. So anyway, there's a heap of options, and there's a lot of flexibility in what you would like, and so therefore there's a lot of different models for people with PWS. And we've seen people with PWS living well in all types of models, sometimes mixed models where they live with other people with disability, but not with PWS. And also we even have people with PWS living alone in accommodation by themselves. But you've got to remember that when they're living alone, they need a lot of funding, because people with PWS generally will need supervision all of the time, because if they're left without supervision, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, they will go looking for food, or they will they'll get themselves in some sort of issues, or they'll tend to put on a lot of weight in any case. So although living alone is very appealing to a lot of people, it's also got to be realised that that's a very expensive model, and it's not going to be something that's going to be deemed as reasonable and necessary for everybody with PWS. So as I said, people with PWS really need a lot of constant supervision, and they need specifically trained staff, we feel, because If people don't understand, if the staff don't understand the issues, quite often they can make mistakes, and then that leads to more problems. Because as we probably know with people with PWS, if you let them have something that you shouldn't let them have, or you encourage them to do the wrong thing once, then that will be repeated over and over again. And that's when it's very hard for you to stop, because people with PWS, they tend to sort of have their idea in a fixed way that if yesterday I got something like an ice cream, then today I'm going to be able to get the same ice cream. And so there tends to be this constant expectation that gets built up that's very hard to reverse. So anyway, shared accommodation, where we have people living with PWS living together in the one sort of house or accommodation model, is very cost effective. And that also allows to have these consistent rules and to allow the staff to all be on the same page, and then they're dealing with everybody in the same way. So we find that that shared PWS specific support is a really good option for people with PWS. So we've been really fortunate under NDIS to be able to design some specific houses for people with PWS. And so those houses are really large. We have a lot of room in them, and we generally like to have en suites or lots of sort of bathrooms that can, so that more than one person can have a shower at the one time and things like that. And then we also have specifically designed kitchens with sort of windows so that staff can see out and keep supervising people while they're cooking. And then air conditioning, because we know that the heat and cold for people with PWS, they don't always feel it. So it's always good to be able to set the temperature. Now, really, none of these things are vital, because our first model didn't have anything special. It's just a normal house with none of these features, and the program still works because it still has the right staffing and the right sort of structures and all the right things. But it has been nice to put these extra sort of features, even like really large hallways, so that if somebody was upset and having some sort of behavioural issues, they wouldn't be able to trap other people. You'd still be able to get around them or past them in the hallway. And then our walls, like having strengthened walls and things like that. So while it's really nice to have these wonderful houses with all the features, it's not essential. It's sort of the most essential thing is having the right staff and having the right program. So in providing residential supports, one of the important things to consider is restrictive practice. So there's a lot of increasing rules around restrictive practices under the NDIS, particularly in Australia, where this area is becoming more and more regulated. So any restrictions around food, so you might have a locked kitchen, or you might only have a certain diet, and restrictions around money, so you might keep the money in the office and only give it to them when they've specific things that they're going to buy, or other items where you're trying to restrict access to something, or you're trying to stop somebody just going out and getting themselves in trouble. They are all restrictive practices, and they require a behaviour support plan which needs to be written by a psychologist. So often consent needs to be done by an appointed guardian, which often means that the parents have to go through a legal sort of process through NCAT in order to get that approval to be able to consent to all those restrictions. And managing behaviours is a really important part of any program for people with PWS. Because even the ones, because quite often we have people with PWS that are going through really good periods and they don't have a lot of behaviours. But I think in our experience, at some point in time, there's always going to be some level of behaviour, whether that's very mild behaviours to do with anxiety and skin picking and things like that, or more severe things where people, we've seen to have a lot of people have run out in front of traffic or gotten really upset, or psychosis. So there's a lot of issues with people with PWS, and quite often these restrictions will be needed, at least to some degree. So all of our programs incorporate healthy food options, and usually they're based on the PWS clinic and their recommendations. And so they'll actually negotiate with each person as to what the diet should look like and what type of things they should be having. But generally our meals are very large. They're huge portions, but they're lower in calories. So what we try and do with people with PWS is have lots of fresh vegetables, lots of fruit, lots of salad, soups, things like that, smoothies, lots of food, 6 meals a day, so that there's always something to look forward to. But those meals are all very healthy meals, and although they're very big in size, they don't have a lot of calories. And then most people will be exercising most days, or in some cases every day. Often at a gym or on treadmills. We have treadmills at our houses, also exercise bikes and even a rowing machine. And then on top of that, incidental exercise is also important. So whenever we try and do activities out in the community, we try and encourage ones that might be bushwalks, or they might be active things where we're doing things, or we might park a bit further away from the shop so we get a nice decent walk in whenever we're going somewhere. And then on top of that, it's also very important to keep people with PWS busy so that there's always something for them to do and always something for them to look forward to. So most of our people with PWS either go to a day program or they have some sort of work, whether that's in a sort of sheltered employment workshop, or maybe they even volunteer sometimes. So the key to our programs is really having a very strong routine and structure. So what we try to do is negotiate a routine with everybody in advance, like a unique sort of way that they will that they will do things every day. And then that would sort of repeat every week or so. So they might have work on certain days or whatever. So, and it'll sort of be like set times for meals is very important. Like a lot of our staff talk about working in the houses being a bit like ready, steady, cook, where you've got to have everything out by the certain time. And also having those meals the same and everybody being able to not feel as though they're getting less than anybody else. So portion sizes are really important. And then we also have exercise and work in those routines. So what time they'll do the exercise, and it's up to them to sort of choose. But then once we have it sort of locked in, then we try and repeat that every single day. And then we try and have a lot of outings, like we might go out for coffee with like light milk in the afternoons and things like that. So lots of activities so that there's always something to keep you occupied and keep you busy. And then also some downtime, because a lot of our people with PWS like to do puzzles or they like to play games or whatever. And then we like to have all that sort of put up on a list or a visual so that everybody knows that that's what's agreed. And then even sort of getting down to having the parents and the workplace all on the same page. And it's all sort of steered by what the person wants, but then it's sort of negotiated. And then we have to keep up our end of the bargain as well to make sure that we follow through. If we say that we're going to do something or that that's the way the routine's going to go, we do our best to make sure that we always have that same consistent approach. So I think the main point that I've been trying to make is that the really important thing when we support people with PWS is having stability and security and a really good routine. And so our people with PWS are happy. Most of the time they're really happy with our supports. Obviously we go through ups and downs, but having that stability and security is probably the key to looking after people with PWS over the long term and making sure that they live very happy and fulfilled lives.